Arriving at their suite, I found a most impressive couple, a middle-aged man of obvious substance. He had been a Republican member of Congress from Illinois. Equally impressive, she was intelligent and well-dressed, the kind of witness any lawyer would love to have testifying on his side in front of a jury. After he had departed on business, I handed her copies of her statements, as they had been printed in the Warren Commission exhibits. She read them carefully and then shook her head. "These have all been altered," she said. "They have me saying just the opposite of what I really told them." Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess, Connell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. Well, I think this is episode 39, if I'm not mistaken. And I have looked at and will include a photo of most of the remaining books. So I think we are going to squeak in under 50 episodes for this series, which I just have to say, I'm so thankful for each one of you that has hung with me during this walkthrough of the Kennedy assassination. I do feel that it has helped me to put certain things in order. Sometimes there are facts that are more sensationalized, that are made much of, and there are other facts, like, for example, Truman's warning to the nation about the CIA, that I only recently learned about, and I'm so thankful to have the full look at what he was saying, what was intended by the creation of the CIA versus what was the outcome, and also things that you just hear in connection with this case that by reading firsthand accounts, we are familiarizing ourselves with. So I feel really thankful for each one of you that has chosen to go along this journey with me, and we still have more fascinating things to come. Today, we are looking at a little bit of Bill Sloan's book, which we have actually looked at this book before, and you guys have told me you love the way that he writes. I'll point you to this book. It's not an expensive one, and it is an excellent one that gives a little look at 12 startling conspiracy stories that can now be told. It's JFK Breaking the Silence, and it looks at people like Bill and Gail Newman, Jim Huggins, all different people, Ed Hoffman, Roy Vaughn. Today, we are looking at the unchosen few. Key witnesses that the Warren Commission completely ignored. We are also going to look a little bit at Garrison's book, On the Trail of the Assassins. We are going to look at, basically, it's called The Reluctant Investigators. In both readings, we're going to see that, the answer to the question of, was this a robust and thorough investigation wherever the facts may lead? And that the answer to that is a resounding no. So let's go ahead and get into this. Before we do, I want to remind you that we have the JFK Historical Conference coming up soon. I will be speaking at that on the Thursday. You can see the link in the show notes if you wish to attend. There are special packages, and we will have a time when you and I can interface and meet and talk through your theories or share facts and just say hello. And then also I will be present at the Lancer conference. And if you wish to go and use my 10% code, it is JFK10. So you can enter that and get 10% off whichever package you choose. Well, let's go ahead and get into Chapter 8, The Unchosen Few. Key witnesses still wonder why they were ignored. In many respects, Bill and Gail Newman have fulfilled the dreams and ambitions of every American couple. They built their own highly successful business, an electrical contracting firm that bears their name. They own a spacious home in a fashionable section of the Dallas suburb of Mesquite, where Bill Newman is a member of the city council and a former mayor pro tem. I will let you know that actually Gail has passed since the writing of this book, but my understanding is that Bill Newman is still alive, and he's one of the witnesses I would love to meet. I don't know if he's still out and about. I know that the witnesses to this event are sadly passing away. It's like when we have all watched the passing of the World War II veterans, and we're getting down to where the last few are sadly passing. It's very similar with the JFK case, where in the last year, we have lost Clint Hill, we lost Ruth Paine. We are rapidly losing access to key figures in the case. And so, Bill Newman is one that's still alive. We're going to hear his story now, along with his wife, Gail. They've seen their 2 children grow up. There's few old regrets or unpleasant memories, but there is one past experience that sometimes still tugs at their minds. And there is one odd omission that continues to puzzle them. At the moment that President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Bill and Gail Newman and their 2 young sons, Billy and Clayton, who were 4 and 2, were among the closest bystanders to the presidential limousine. Bill explained, "We heard the first 2 shots as the car was coming toward us and still some distance from us. But when the last shot hit, we were probably no more than 8 feet away, as close as from me to you." They were close enough to see Kennedy clutching at his throat, close enough to see a bright splash of blood on Governor Connolly's shirt and his eyes bulging with pain. Close enough to see, just a split second later, the side of Kennedy's head blown off. Close enough to see him hurl across the seat toward his wife, to hear Jackie cry out in horror, "Oh my God, no, they've shot Jack." As the fatal shot struck and the Newmans realized what was happening, the limousine was almost even with where they were standing, at a point on the north side of Elm Street, directly below the grassy knoll. Convinced that the shots were coming from behind them and sensing that they were in grave danger of being hit themselves, the Newmans reacted with a protective instinct known to every normal parent. They instantly pushed Billy and Clayton to the ground and threw themselves on top of the 2 youngsters, shielding them with their own bodies. Of course, those photos were among the very first taken of the post-assassination scene. In fact, there are people like Jim Tague's position way down by the bridge that is only seen because reporters were taking a photo of Bill and Gail Newman thrown down on the grassy knoll, but off in the distance you can see the little figure of Jim Tague, which proved where Jim Tague was when the shrapnel hit his face. Even during this terrible, terror-stricken interval, however, the Newmans remained acutely aware of what was going on in the motorcade. "I believe Kennedy's car came to a full stop after the final shot," Bill Newman says. One of the 2 men in the front seat had a telephone to his ear, as though he were awaiting instructions. Then suddenly the car took off. A car filled with Secret Servicemen was just behind the president's car, and when it was right beside us, it paused, and I saw several men with what looked like Thompson submachine guns get out of the car. I have a strong impression that these men were left behind when the motorcade went on, but I've never heard anyone confirm that. Although no other eyewitnesses have mentioned seeing armed agents disembarking from the motorcade, at least in official transcripts and deposition, there is ample evidence to suggest that Bill Newman may indeed have seen precisely what he believed he saw. Federal investigators and the Secret Service itself have long insisted that no Secret Service agents were on the ground in Dealey Plaza either before or immediately after the assassination. The HSCA, that's the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded nearly 15 years after the fact that except for Agent in Charge Forrest Sorrells of the Dallas field office, who returned there about an hour after the assassination, no Secret Service personnel were present in the immediate area that day at all, other than those who passed through with the motorcade. Interestingly enough, however, a number of witnesses, including veteran police officers, have told of encountering armed men in Dealey Plaza who identified themselves as Secret Service agents. In fact, Lee Oswald himself told one of his interrogators shortly before he was killed that he had been approached by a young crew cut man who rushed up to him outside the Texas Schoolbook Depository, showed him Secret Service credentials, and asked where he could find a telephone. Bill Newman's observations might have lent credence to these other sightings, except for one thing. Neither he nor his wife was ever called to testify before the Warren Commission. believing this to be true would require that the entire sequence of Kennedy's assassination and the filming would have to have been altered. If the car immediately behind Kennedy stopped and men got out with machine guns, it's a very different picture than what we've been told. Now, could Bill Newman be combining, say, a later car or the reporters who stopped the bus and got out? Possibly. Some of this appears to be combining of evidence into a pattern that hasn't fit what we've already read. Now, this happens with eyewitness accounts. And so as we've talked about in the past, like with Gene Hill's observations, at no point do we turn off our brains. At no point do we say, this observer, this Warren Commission member, this eyewitness told us the entire perfect truth, and therefore all of reality must bend to fit their observations. No, we can each, if we think back to various events in our lives, we can each say, you know what, I was keenly focused on this, and maybe I surmised wrongly what happened here. I think we all have that possibility when we encounter stressful circumstances where we hyper focus on one thing, like protecting our children, and maybe piece together nearby vague details that we have into a narrative that makes sense to us. So I think it's possible that he observed a few other strands of things and put together a story. I mean, you could believe every word he saw, but I just want you to know that's how I read things like this, and that's what I'm doing when I listen, is I'm just kind of holding out his narrative to understand what he is asserting happened, so that then I can evaluate it in light of everything else that I know. In all likelihood, no family in Dallas had devoted more effort than the Newmans to getting a close-up look at the president that day. They had driven across town from their home in Oak Cliff, west of downtown, to Love Field in order to be there when Air Force One touched down. So that's pretty cool. They were there at the airport when it touched down. We saw the president and Mrs. Kennedy get off the plane, but there was such a crowd, Bill recalls, that Gail and Billy didn't really get a good view. So we jumped in our car and drove downtown to try again. An added attraction was that Gail's uncle, Steve Ellis, was a Dallas motorcycle officer who would be riding in the parade. So they wanted to see her uncle. We had to park several blocks away and walk to Houston and Elm Street, Bill said, but we thought that the best place to see the president up close would be there. We had started walking west toward the Triple Underpass, where there weren't so many people, when we heard the motorcade coming. You could hear the excitement in the air as the president's car approached. Then as the car turned onto Elm Street and descended the incline toward them, they heard two shots close together. It was boom, boom, like that, Bill says. For a second, I thought it was firecrackers, which was the observation of many in Dealey Plaza that day. I think a lot of us, if we heard a shot, we might think of a car backfiring or we might think of firecrackers. But the description of many people that day is firecrackers. But then I saw Kennedy raise his arms toward his face, and I knew it was shots. Then, just as the car came abreast of us, a third shot hit and the blood went everywhere. It seemed to me that the shooting was coming from directly behind me, and I thought we must be right in the line of fire. That's when we turned around and hit the grass. Gail recalled, I had Billy with me, and Bill was holding Clayton. And even in the state of shock I was in, my first thought was for the safety of our boys. Bill makes it clear, as he has all along, that when he says directly behind me, he means a point on the grassy knoll near the concrete pergola, which, along with the wooden picket fence, forms the northern boundary of Dealey Plaza. As he would say in a signed statement to the Dallas County Sheriff's Department later that same afternoon, I thought the final shot had come from the garden directly behind me. I do not recall looking toward the Texas School Book Depository. I looked back in the vicinity of the garden. The Newmans were among the first eyewitnesses to be interviewed on television, and the agonizing moments followed the first reports of the tragedy. Just after the shooting stopped, two men from WFAA, which is Channel 8 here in Dallas, the ABC channel, they came running over and asked us what we had seen, said Gail. They asked if we'd go to the station with them, and we jumped into somebody's car and drove over there, a distance of only 3 blocks. They broke into the regular program and put us right on the air. One of the interesting things that you may want to do after this is to just go watch that segment. It is on YouTube. You can watch it. It is so interesting because at that time, the world had a very formalized view of what the news was. And it was very upright and a very particular voice and delivered by a man in a suit. And instead, what you have is this man and woman with their children crawling on them. And the reporter kind of gets down in their face and he just kind of says, well, we're just going to go with it. Like, he knows this isn't a very clear shot. We haven't framed up the camera the way we normally would, but we're just going to do it. It's kind of like live vlogging now or something, like an actual YouTube channel covering the news. That's what it feels like. Is like, well, these people's kids are crawling all over them, but we got to get the story right now. So it's worth going to see. During that TV interview, Bill was asked where the shots had come from, and he replied, back up on the knoll, what you call it. His response may have made him the first person ever to use that now familiar term. So he indicated the knoll. Now, Jean Hill says she was the first person to call it the grassy knoll. We don't know. I don't know. But it's interesting that they both arrived at the same word for it. Initially, he had said garden, and then he says that knoll, what you call it. When the Newmans came out of the TV studio, they found 2 sheriff's deputies waiting for them, and they were taken to the sheriff's office where they were questioned and detained for hours while officers reviewed the affidavits of 16 eyewitnesses for discrepancies. We weren't allowed to leave until about 9:30 that night, Bill says. Gail's father had come and pick up the boys. They were totally worn out. The following Sunday, 2 FBI agents came to the Newman home and interviewed them both. That was the day that Jack Ruby shot Oswald. They were very nice, very courteous and professional, says Gail. They talked to us for about an hour and then they left. And that was the last we ever heard about it from any of the federal authorities. Anxious to put the whole traumatic and unnerving episode behind them, they never sought to draw further attention to themselves. Their concern was focused for a time on what possible after effects the experience might have had on their children. Both boys were apparently too young to be scarred emotionally. Billy asked me later, Mother, did you see all that blood? But after that, he seemed to forget about it, and I don't think Clayton ever understood what had happened. Under the circumstances, the Newmans say they paid little attention at the time to the fact that they were never contacted by the Warren Commission. In spite of our being as close to the assassination as anyone, we just didn't think much about it at first, says Bill. But as the years passed, we did begin to wonder why. And looking back on it now, it really does seem strange that they had called so many others, people who couldn't have seen nearly as much as we did, and not us. Although totally ignored by federal investigators, both Bill and Gail were asked by Jim Garrison to testify when he brought businessman Clay Shaw to trial in early 1969. Both willingly complied, even though they had to travel to New Orleans separately to give their testimony. I testified first, Gail says. Then I came home and Bill went down there. It was scary for me because it was not only my first time to testify in court, but my first trip by plane, too. Mainly, the prosecutors wanted to know exactly where the family was standing when the shots were fired. Obviously, this was because we had said the shots came from behind us, Gail says. It seems equally obvious today that this was something the Warren Commission preferred not to hear. I liked Jim Garrison, says Bill. I think he was on the right track. There's a lot of evidence that at least 2 people were shooting that day, and that shots came from both the depository and the area of the picket fence. I've never talked much about it, and I don't really like talking about it now, but To me, it had to be something more than just one man acting alone. And there, in a nutshell, may lie the reason why the Warren Commission chose to ignore two of the most important witnesses to the murder of a president, and to exclude from its report key testimony that could have cast serious doubt on its final conclusions. Well, that is the segment that we get about Bill and Gail Newman. Now we're going to pick up with the book by the man he just talked about, Jim Garrison, who had invited them down to New Orleans. We're going to pick up with chapter 17 that he titles The Reluctant Investigators. Some of the best witnesses to the assassination found their way to us after it became apparent to them that the federal agents and the Dallas police really were not interested in what they saw. Julia Ann Mercer was just such a witness. In fact, no other witness so completely illuminated for me the extent of the cover-up. Mercer had been but a few feet away when one of the riflemen was unloaded at the grassy knoll shortly before the arrival of the presidential motorcade. Consequently, she was a witness not only to the preparation of President Kennedy's murder, but also to the conspiracy involved. She gave statements to the FBI and the Dallas Sheriff's Office, and she then returned to the FBI and provided additional statements, but she was never called by the Warren Commission, not even to provide an affidavit. Much earlier, I had read Julia Ann Mercer's statements in the Warren Commission exhibits, but I had never had a chance to talk to her. Then one day, in early 1968, her husband called me at the office. He said that he and his wife were in New Orleans on business and had some things to tell me. I agreed to meet them at the Fairmont. Arriving at their suite, I found a most impressive couple, a middle-aged man of obvious substance. He had been a Republican member of Congress from Illinois. Equally impressive, she was intelligent and well-dressed, the kind of witness any lawyer would love to have testifying on his side in front of a jury. After he had departed on business, I handed her copies of her statements as they had been printed in the Warren Commission exhibits. She read them carefully and then shook her head. "These have all been altered," she said. "They have me saying just the opposite of what I really told them." About an hour before the assassination, she had been driving west on Elm Street and had been stopped just past the grassy knoll by traffic congestion. To her surprise, because she recalled that the president's parade was coming soon, she saw a young man in the pickup truck to her right, dismount, carrying a rifle. She then observed him walk up, quote, "the grassy hill which forms part of the overpass." She looked at the driver several times, got a good look at his round face and brown eyes, and he looked right back at her. Mercer also observed that 3 police officers were standing near a motorcycle on the overpass bridge above her and just ahead. She recalled that they showed no curiosity about the young man climbing the side of the grassy knoll with the rifle. After the assassination, when Mercer sought to make this information available to law enforcement authorities, their response was almost frenzied. At the FBI office, where she went the day after the assassination, she was shown a number of mugshots. Among the several she selected as resembling the driver was a photograph of Jack Ruby. This was on Saturday, before Jack Ruby became famous. That's important. She identified Jack Ruby, and also the Dallas police offered her a photo that was Jack Ruby on the Saturday. On Sunday, when she saw Ruby kill Oswald on television, she positively recognized him as the driver of the pickup truck and promptly notified the local FBI office. Nevertheless, her statement was altered, so it did not note that she had made a positive identification. She laughed when she pointed this out to me. "See? The FBI made it just the opposite of what I really told them. How could I not recognize Jack Ruby when I saw him shoot Oswald on television?" The Dallas Sheriff's Office went through the same laborious fraud and added an imaginative touch of its own. Although Mercer had never been brought before any notary, the Sheriff's Office filed a sworn affidavit stating that she did not identify the driver, although she might if I see him again, and significantly changing other facts. "See that notarized signature?" she asked me. "That's not my signature either. I signed my name with a big A, like this." She produced a pen and wrote her name for me. It was clear that the signature the Dallas Sheriff's Office had on its altered statement was not even close to hers. Julia Ann Mercer then wrote on the side of my copies of the FBI and the Dallas Sheriff fabrications the correct version of what she had seen then. That version had not been acceptable in Dallas, but it was more than welcome to me. Conscious of the sudden deaths of some witnesses who appeared to have seen too much for their own survival, I thought that she should sign her maiden name, as she had back in Dallas right after the assassination. At my suggestion, she did so. When I got back to my office, I thought about Julia Ann Mercer. She had been only a few feet away from one of the most crucial incidents of the assassination and had tried in vain to tell the authorities the simple truth. The implications were profound. First, her observations provided further evidence that there was another rifleman. To me, the responses to her statements were even more chilling. They proved that law enforcement officials recognized early on that a conspiracy existed. Both local and federal authorities had altered her statements to conceal that fact. He notes that the FBI had shown the photo of Jack Ruby to her the day before Jack Ruby shot Lee Oswald. The Bureau's failure to locate Ruby immediately for questioning once she identified him, along with the rewrite job on her statements, made me uncomfortable. Here he starts the introduction of an interesting witness. He talks about Mark Lane meeting a former FBI employee named William S. Walter. During their conversation, Walter mentioned that on November 17th, 1963, 5 days before the assassination, he had been the night clerk on duty at the FBI's New Orleans office when a warning about a possible presidential assassination attempt came chattering through on the teletype machine. Walter immediately called 5 agents who handled the relevant local investigatory units and considered his duty done. Here is the statement comprised from both Mark Lane's observations and Jim Garrison's conversation with Walter. In 1976, Walter gave a copy of the text of the FBI telex to the Senate Intelligence Committee that was chaired by Senator Richard Schweiker of Pennsylvania. I'm reminded that in our last reading, Senator Schweiker is the one who made the comment about the Warren Commission being a complete mess. After the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, was passed, Lane obtained a copy of the warning telex and made it available to me. This is what it said. This was November 17th, 1963. To all SACs from Director. Threat to assassinate President Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 23, 1960. So 22nd to the 23rd, 1963. Miscellaneous information concerning information has been received by the Bureau. Bureau has determined that a militant revolutionary group may attempt to assassinate President Kennedy on his proposed trip to Dallas, Texas, November 22-23, 1963. All receiving offices should immediately contact all CIS, PCIS, logical, race, and hate group informants and determine if any basis for threat. Bureau should be kept advised of all developments by teletype. Other offices have been advised. End and ACK, please. We learned from Walter that when the assassination occurred, he was eating lunch, but immediately ran back to the New Orleans Bureau office. In the file, he found the warning telex along with a duplicate which had soon followed it. At the time, he copied the exact phraseology of the telex warning and kept it. Shortly afterwards, he checked the file again to see if the warning was still there. It had been removed. No sign of it or reference to it remained. The telex had been most explicit, naming both a place and dates for the attempted assassination. It was addressed to all special agents in charge, which meant everyone in the country, including Dallas. And yet the FBI did nothing. There is no record that it notified anyone, not even the Secret Service. The 5-day warning took on added significance when I belatedly learned of some remarkable information from C.A. Hamblin. He was the early night manager of Western Union's Dallas office. A week or so following the assassination, I discovered that Hamblin had stated to a number of individuals that approximately 10 days before the assassination, Lee Oswald had been in the Western Union office and had sent a telegram to Washington, D.C. It was his impression that Oswald's telegram had been directed to the Secretary of the Navy. I already knew that Oswald was assertive enough to have sent other complaints, a fact that Hamblin could not have been expected to know. Hamblin also recalled that on several occasions Oswald had come to the Western Union office to collect modest money orders that had been sent to him. According to him, for identification, Oswald showed a library card and a Navy ID card. This was very close to what Oswald routinely carried for identification, a library card and a Marine ID card. Now, something I've learned since my son is a Marine is that the Marines and the Navy work closely together. One angle that you might want to know in regard to the assassination is that some people suspect that Oswald may have been an intelligence officer for the Navy, for Naval Intelligence, ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence. And so there is some speculation about that, but if there was a Navy card and he was sending communiques to the Secretary of the Navy, then it is possible that that's an intelligence link. I know there's also people who say he was working with the FBI. There was suspicion by Gerald Ford that perhaps he had been employed by the FBI. So there's interesting things about Oswald, but I think this Navy card is interesting. With Hamblin's recollection, an intriguing situation arose. About 10 days before the assassination, Lee Oswald sent his telegram. Then 5 days before, the FBI sent the telex warning of the impending attempt to kill the president. Might the two be related? What this is getting at is perhaps Oswald had learned through his intelligence gathering in the extremist groups in Dallas about the assassination attempt. And perhaps he had communicated that, and then there was a warning from the FBI. So if so, this would put an entire spin on what we think about Lee Oswald. It would turn him from the assassin who somehow violated his own principles. I mean, let's just stop for a minute. Lee Oswald, an avowed communist who said he liked Kennedy, would be killing the president that he admired, who had done the most to regulate and normalize and make peace with the relationship between the USA and the USSR. It doesn't really make sense. However, if he is the one who's warning about the assassination plots, it completely upends what we know about Oswald. My earlier research about Oswald's relationship to the FBI seemed relevant. I had learned long before that Oswald's address book had the name of the FBI agent James Hosty. Immediately following his name, he had written a phone number. I obtained a Dallas phone directory for the year 1963 and found that this was not the phone number of the local FBI. Yet, as I discovered, Hosty's home phone number was not in the directory. It was apparent then that Oswald had written down Hosty's unlisted home number or some message center. I knew that when the FBI gave the Warren Commission a list of the contents of Oswald's address book, it omitted Special Agent Hosty's name and unlisted number. Even the Warren Commission was disturbed when it found out about this oversight. The FBI explained that the omission had been made because the person who transcribed the list was only interested in lead information. Years after the Warren Commission inquiry, an item appeared in the press describing Oswald's visit to the Dallas FBI office. The news story said that Oswald had left a note addressed to Agent Hosty. The woman at the bureau office who first received the message stated that it contained a threat by Oswald to blow up the FBI office. On the other hand, Hosty explained that it was just a warning to him to stop questioning Oswald's wife at their home while Oswald was not present. If the note was a threat to blow up the FBI Dallas headquarters, then Oswald should have been placed immediately on the dangerous character list for special attention prior to the president's arrival in Dallas. Even if the note was a much milder threat, Oswald ordinarily should have been given a prompt evaluation interview. However, in this case, the Dallas FBI took no action whatsoever. What the note actually said will never be known for sure. Hosty claims that the special agent in charge, Gordon Shanklin, ordered him to destroy it, which he promptly did. Interestingly, Hosty said that he never mentioned the note to the Warren Commission because he had, quote, been instructed by the FBI not to volunteer information. The image of Oswald bringing a note for Hosty to the bureau office and leaving it at the front desk is compelling. I recall the way that confidential informants often communicated with their contact agents during my tour with the FBI in Seattle and Tacoma. Most of the informants would leave messages or information concerning an assignment at the front desk in a sealed envelope addressed to their contact agent. The informants were paid moderately for the secret information they provided, and their identity was carefully protected. I began to wonder if, in the weeks before the assassination, Lee Oswald was a confidential informant for the FBI, reporting to Hosty. This possibility had been raised early in 1964 by Wagner Carr. He's the man we just talked about, who was the Attorney General of Texas. A man of high integrity and repute, Carr, who had tried to open up a Texas investigation, you'll remember, but it was basically superseded and sidelined by the advent of the Warren Commission. He told the Warren Commission in a secret session, January 22nd, 1964, that evidence he had acquired from Alan Sweat, the chief of the criminal division of the Dallas Sheriff's Office, indicated that Lee Oswald had been an undercover informant. More specifically, Oswald had been employed by the FBI as confidential agent number 179 at a salary of $200 a month, beginning more than a year prior to and continuing up to the very day of the murder of the president. This shocking news leaked into the media, appearing in articles in the Philadelphia Inquirer, Houston Post, and The Nation. After considerable debate, the Warren Commission agreed that it was necessary to conduct thorough hearings on this matter. Unfortunately, no such hearings were held. Of the three byline writers just mentioned, Joe Golden, Lonnie Hudkins, and Harold Feldman, who were the ones who wrote in Philadelphia, Houston, and in The Nation, not one was called as a witness by the commission, nor was the original source, the chief of the sheriff's criminal division, ever called. Okay, we get Bill and Gail Newman, Julia Ann Mercer, news journalists who had a story about Oswald being an FBI agent, an FBI informant. Even if they decided to protect their source, they could testify on the record and say, a source came to me, this person is high up in government, or this person is an FBI special agent in charge, or whatever, and they testified to me personally that he was FBI confidential agent number 179. Or the chief of the sheriff's criminal division, who had given that information to Wagner Carr, the Attorney General of Texas, could have been called. Over the years, Wagner Carr's allegations had been lost amidst the information theories and speculations. But now, the idea that Oswald had been a confidential informant for the FBI, which I had discarded at first as a strained premise, began to make sense to me. It could explain the presence of Hosty's name and unlisted number in his address book, Oswald's visit to the bureau office, and his threatening note to Hosty. The confidential informant possibility threw a most intriguing light on another curious fact. The FBI did not mention Lee Oswald as a suspect in the assassination until 2.5 hours after the shooting, shortly after Air Force One had departed for Washington with a new president, Lyndon Johnson, and John Kennedy's body aboard. According to Dallas Police Lieutenant Jack Revel, an FBI agent came up to him at Dallas Police Headquarters at 2:50 and said the Bureau had, quote, information that this suspect was capable of committing the assassination. The agent who brought this welcome news and was the first to mention the name of Lee Harvey Oswald was none other than James Hosty. Was he merely an innocent messenger, or had he and possibly others in the Bureau been involved in a plot to set up Oswald as the patsy? He begins to play with the ideas in his brain. He says if he was on the government payroll as a confidential informant in Dallas and New Orleans, he might well have believed that his job was to penetrate subversive organizations, including Fair Play for Cuba, in order to report back to the FBI about them. Along the way, he was allowed to penetrate a marginal part of the assassination project. He may have even filed reports with Hosty. When Oswald sensed that Hosty was not responsive, he may have gone over his head and telegraphed some kind of warning to the Secretary of the Navy, who may have informed the FBI, which then sent out its warning telex. But it was equally possible that Oswald had been acting as an informant for some other branch of the intelligence community as well, such as ONI or the CIA, represented by Guy Bannister, and was withholding relevant information about the conspiracy from Hosty and the FBI. It was impossible to know what was in Lee Harvey Oswald's mind, but whatever he thought he was doing, he had clearly acquired more information than the assassination's engineers could tolerate. That is why he had to die so suddenly in Dallas less than 72 hours after John Kennedy. So that is what we get from these two readings. It's just a smattering of a few people who were not called before the Warren Commission. I don't mean this to be a thorough look at that. What I mean to do is to alert you to the fact that actual eyewitnesses who were the very first people photographed and interviewed were not called. That a woman who made her observations known on day one to the FBI, made multiple credible reports, reportedly identified Jack Ruby the day before he shot Lee Oswald. She was not called. And then this officer who had identified the link between Oswald and the FBI, he was not called. The reporters were not called. The Attorney General of Texas, he made his statement before the Warren Commission, and then it was overlooked, basically. It was dismissed. The Warren Commission said, we should definitely look into that. And then they did not look into that. So this is to show you the slipshod manner that the Warren Commission operated in. That it was not a thorough, let's look at every fact wherever the facts may lead. That was not what it was. And I want that to be very clear to you and I. Now, there is definitely deeper that you could go into. There are entire lists of people who ought to have been called that were not called. But again, this is a smattering. Let me know what you think about these particular witnesses, that they weren't called, and that line of thinking that Oswald was Agent 179, paid $200 a month by the FBI as a regular informant. What do you make of that? That was never pursued by the Warren Commission is very highly suspect. The next look that we are going to have is through Inquest by Epstein. We are going to look at the commission hearings, and we are going to look at the way that they selected which facts they would highlight in their report. That's where we are going next. We will continue on in our discussion, and like I said, in about 8 episodes or less, we should be wrapping up our walkthrough of the chronological look at the assassination. We are going to go through what I've decided. We're going to go through the Warren Commission, and we're going to go through the HSCA, and that will be the end of our historical literary look at the JFK assassination. So that's where we're going. I hope you'll come back and stick with me for the rest of it, and I hope you have a great day. Take care. Bye.